All right, rivalry week coming up. Got a full slate of games all day Friday, all day Saturday. I'm going to take a couple of videos here over the next couple of days and talk about some of the more interesting matchups, bigger matchups with playoff implications or conference championship game implications. But it's going to be an unbelievable 2 days of football. It's one of my favorite weekends of the college football season every single year, either this weekend, rivalry weekend, or week one. I think those are always the two best weekends of college football. But today I want to talk about two games in particular, one on Friday, one on Saturday. We're going to start the Saturday game. I want to talk first about Michigan, Ohio State, and then we're going to talk about Georgia Tech. First up, Michigan and Ohio State. What are we supposed to do with this game? What are we supposed to make of this game in terms of talking about the game, previewing the game, predicting the game? I don't think there's anybody that thinks Michigan's a better team than Ohio State. Now, there are, I'm sure, a ton of Michigan fans who, have confidence Michigan's going to win the game or whatever like that. But like realistically, there's just nothing about Michigan this season that would lead you to believe they're a better team than Ohio State. That's great that you can watch football and figure that out, right? The problem is, there was nothing last year that made you think Michigan was better than Ohio State. And you could argue that the year before, and the year before. You know what I'm getting at here. It's the 4-game streak. Michigan has beat Ohio State now 4 years in a row. Ohio State hasn't won this game since 2019. They didn't play in 2020, the COVID year, but since then, Michigan has won every single year, 21, 22, 23, and 24. And last year, the Michigan win last year was one of the most shocking wins maybe that I've ever seen. I mean, there were bigger upsets, I guess, if you want to talk about, of course, App State, Michigan, and whatever you go through the list. Oh, this team was a 40-point favorite and lost. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about it just was unbelievable. And then the way the game played out, and you're like, what is Ohio State doing? It was unbelievable. And then here I am a year later, sitting here, coming up on another Michigan-Ohio State game where I'm looking at these two teams and I'm going, this isn't a difficult choice. Like, Ohio State's the better team. But then you got that, you can't get rid of that thing in the back of your head that goes, well, doesn't matter. Michigan beats them every year. It's like roulette. I don't know how many of y'all gamble or have been to a casino or who have ever played roulette before, but when you walk up to a roulette table in Vegas or whatever casino, they've usually got a video board, an LED screen hanging there. And on that LED screen, it tells you like the last 15 or 20 spins that have come on the wheel. And there's a lot of people who like to walk around to the different roulette tables and they like to find a wheel that is hit red, 4 times in a row, 5 times in a row, 6 times in a row, or black 4 times, 5 times, 6 times in a row, right? And they'll look at it one of two ways. They'll go, oh, look, red is hit 5 times in a row. Let's go bet red. Let's play the heater. You got another group of people that'll look at that same wheel and go, oh, wow, look, it's hit red 4 or 5 times in a row. Black is due. Let's go bet black. Regardless of which side of that you're on, whether you look at it and you want to ride the streak or whether you look at that roulette wheel and you go, wow, black is the other side is due. The reality of roulette is previous spins have no impact on the next spin. In other words, the odds of the roulette wheel landing on red are exactly the same on every single spin, no matter what happened the spin before or the 10 spins before. If it hit red 10 times in a row, the odds are the same on that 11th spin between red and black as they were 10 spins ago. How many times in a row red or black hits doesn't affect the odds of the next spin. It's a mental game that the casino, it's a mental trick that the casino pulls on you. They wouldn't even tell you how many times in a row red or black it hit or what the streak was if it helped you in any way. In fact, the opposite is true. It hurts you. College football is not roulette. I'm not trying to say that it is. But there's the same sort of mind game goes on in your head, I think, when you sit down and look at this Michigan and Ohio State game. Again, not if you're an Ohio State fan and not if you're a Michigan fan. That's different. You're an Ohio State fan. You always think you're going to win this game. You're a Michigan fan. You always think you're going to win this game. I understand that. I'm talking about everybody else who's looking at this game and going, all right, who's going to win, Michigan or Ohio State? It's the roulette wheel trick. and you're falling on one of two sides. You're looking at this game and you're going, well, Michigan's won 4 times in a row. Ohio State was better every single year. This year, Ohio State looks better, but Michigan wins every year. So it's got to be Michigan again. Then you got the other side of the equation. It goes, yeah, I know Michigan's won 4 in a row and Ohio State's been the better team every year, but they eventually Ohio State's got to win one, right? The reality is it might not matter. Now, I think it does matter more in college football. There are some mental advantages or mental hurdles, I think, that can apply in college football that have nothing to do with the roulette strategy, roulette analogy that I made, right? Kirby Smart and Alabama is another example, kind of what's going on with Michigan and Ohio State. You can make the case that in a lot of Georgia's losses to Alabama, they were the better team. Last year they lost to Alabama. They went on to win the SEC and make the playoffs, while Alabama was a 3-loss team that sat home for the playoffs. 2021, I guess it was, Bama beat Georgia. Georgia goes on to win the national championship. Ironically, Ohio State did the same thing last year after their loss to Michigan. But the point I'm making is, I do think there's some truth to the mental hurdle aspect or the mental advantage aspect of college football. And in this case, specifically in the Ohio State-Michigan case, there is a theory out there that, Michigan just has some sort of mental advantage over Ohio State and Ryan Day in particular, that Ryan Day has this mental block, this mental hurdle. Last year, we'll never get inside Ryan Day's head, I guess, to really figure it out. But the sort of prevalent thought coming out of that game was, why did Ohio State run the ball? Were they trying to prove a point rather than win the game? Ohio State excels everywhere, really, but particularly in their matchup with Michigan. Where are the advantages for Ohio State, whether you're talking about last year or this year? They're on the outside. They're the skill positions, right? Michigan has struggled offensively for a few years at the wide receiver position and the quarterback position. They've had a pretty good run game. This year specifically, they were going to be without their number 1 running back, the number 2, Jordan Marshall, I think is his name. He'll get the start, but Justice Haynes is out. But even if Justice Haynes is in there, just as a college football idiot, just as people who just watch college football like we do, you've watched Michigan, you kind of know what Michigan is. You've watched Ohio State, you kind of know what they are. What do you think the advantages are for Ohio State over Michigan? Well, it's Jeremiah Smith, it's Carnell Tate, it's Julian Sand, it's spread you out, throw the ball down the field, score quick, explosive plays. Not that, and I don't mean that to say that Ohio State can't run the ball. Ohio State can run the ball. They've got one of the best offenses in the country. They're talented everywhere. But when Ohio State makes a decision to run the ball and play the game between the tackles against Michigan, they're playing into the strength of Michigan. And it didn't make any sense. And honestly, I feel like if they do that again this year, they could find themselves in a similar spot in the second half of that game. It could be a 14-10 or a 17-13 game, up or down one way or the other, in the second half or fourth quarter this year, if that's the sort of game that we're going to play. Weather may be something to consider in this game, especially if you're an Ohio State fan. God knows they've never lost a game because the other team was better. Every time Ohio State loses, it's because somebody was hurt or the weather was bad or it was played in this stadium instead of that stadium. 20 degrees and an 80% chance of snow for this game. If I'm Ohio State, I just say, oh, well, we're going to have to throw the ball in the snow then. I expect Ohio State to come out slinging the ball, spreading Michigan out. I expect to see all of the Ohio State offense from the word go in this game. Will it work? Well, obviously, if you're Ohio State, you hope it does. I don't think we're going to see what we saw last year, which is more of Ryan Day trying to prove a point. We're tough. We can beat you on the line of scrimmage. We don't even need to utilize our speed players on the outside. We can just dominate you, play this game in a phone booth, and beat you between the tackles. That became more important to Ryan Day specifically and Ohio State than actually winning the game, and it cost them the game. I don't think that's what we're going to see this year. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it will work, but I expect Ohio State to spread Michigan out, throw the ball. I think Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate will both be back from everything I'm seeing. I expect Ohio State to use the weapons they have. I expect Ohio State's goal in this game to be to win the game, not to prove a point. In fact, winning the game will prove the point. Will prove a point. Like, and that should, your goal should be to win the game. And in winning the game, the point is proven. Last year it seemed backwards. Let's prove a point and hopefully we win. And they didn't. Michigan, talked a lot about Ohio State. Talk about Michigan. Bryce Underwood, has, I think, not been great this year. He has played better generally at home than he has on the road. He's had a couple of good games. They beat Maryland last week more comfortably than I thought they would. I thought they would struggle on the road again. I thought maybe look ahead spot to Ohio State, but they looked apart last week. And it feels like Michigan's been kind of a forgotten team this year, really, outside of everybody just kind of waiting on this Ohio State game. But Michigan's only got 2 losses. Only one of them is a Big Ten loss. Their other loss was to Oklahoma. They lost to Southern Cal on the road, and they lost to Oklahoma on the road. So they still have a chance for the Big Ten championship game, the playoffs, all of that. It's not like Michigan's just showing up here and the only thing on the line is a win against Ohio State. That's obviously a big deal, and that is a win against Ohio State is on the line. But a win against Ohio State would mean a continuation of Michigan's season in a meaningful way, outside of just another bowl game, which is what they had last year at 7-5. They're obviously going to do better than that this year. They're 9-2. Home field advantage, I think, is big here for Michigan. Potentially the weather, if that affects Julian Sayin and Ohio State's ability to throw the ball, maybe. But to sort of get back to the roulette analogy before I give you my pick on this game, just like in roulette where it's a mind trick, it's not really an advantage to you to know what the last 10 spins were. And just because it hit red 10 times in a row doesn't mean that it is more likely to hit red again or more likely to hit black. It doesn't mean any of those. Each spin is independent of the previous spins. I'm going to look at this game the same way, and maybe I'm wrong again because I've been wrong every year on this game, but I'm going with Ohio State here, and I think we'll know quick in this game if it's going to be a game. I think it's possible if Ohio State is able, if Ohio State does what I think they're going to do and it works, I think we'll know that by the end of the first quarter, and Ohio State will have a 10 or 14 point lead in this game. If halfway through the second quarter, it's 7-3 and Ohio State is running the ball on 3rd and 6 every time, then we're probably headed towards another 1-possession fourth quarter game. And you got to think in that scenario, you want to talk about mental advantages or mental hurdles. If this game gets into the fourth quarter and Michigan is either winning or within 3 or 4 points, you got to think the pressure on Ryan Day is going to start to mount. The sort of ghosts of the last 4 games are going to start to creep into the Ohio State players and coaching staff's mind. I feel like the longer Michigan can keep this thing close, obviously the better of a chance they would have to win it in the end. I think a close game actually favors Michigan here, but I just don't know that it's going to be close. I think there's a more than 50% chance that Ohio State wins this game by 3 touchdowns. I'm not here to crap on the Michigan fans. You guys have proved me wrong now 4 years in a row when it comes to picking this game, and you could be about to make it 5. The line is 10 points in this game in favor of Ohio State. I'm going to take Ohio State minus the 10. I think they win by 2 or 3 scores. Now let's move on to the a Friday game, Georgia and Georgia Tech. Now, this is maybe the game of the year last year in the regular season. A rivalry game, Black Friday, day after Thanksgiving, rivalry weekend, and it goes to 8 overtimes. Georgia Tech probably should have won the game last year. They dominated the first half for sure. They sort of let Georgia claw their way back in the second half. The thing ends up going to overtime, and Georgia Tech made some of the worst play calls imaginable during those 8 overtimes. Haynes King runs is what gave Georgia Tech their lead in the first half. It's what kept Georgia Tech in the game in the second half when Georgia mounted that comeback. And then you get to the overtime, and there was no Haynes King runs. They were throwing the ball and toss sweeps to the running back. I'm like, what are they doing? If they just run the ball with Haynes King, they're going to win. The overtime rules, after the second overtime, you're just 2-point conversions. You're starting on the 2-yard line. Haynes King can close his eyes and was gaining 5 yards on that Georgia defense last year on the quarterback draws, and they just completely abandoned it in overtime, and Georgia gets the win. And I said at the time, I said it all off season, and I still feel the same way now. This has been a very lopsided rivalry, really over the course of history, but particularly this century. Georgia Tech has only beaten Georgia 3 times since the turn of the century, and they play every single year. When something becomes that lopsided and you have a chance to win, you've got to take advantage of it. And that was Georgia Tech last year. I feel like they blew the best opportunity they've had to win this game in a long time last year. And I feel like it may be another couple of years before they get that good of an opportunity again. That was what I said after the game last year and all offseason. Then the season started, and Georgia Tech looked pretty good at times, and Haynes King was running all over the place. And then he even had a couple of 300-yard passing games. And before you know it, Georgia Tech's 5-0, 6-0, 7-0. They had to win against Clemson early in the year. At that particular time, we didn't really know. Well, we didn't know that Clemson was as bad as they were. And you looked at that win like, wow, this is a good win here for Georgia Tech, you know? There was a Wake Forest game that they probably should have lost, but they won it at the end, and you're like, wow, you know, they're a team that is figuring out ways to win these close games where they don't play great at the end, as opposed to losing games at the end, you know. And then the last 3 or 4 games happened, and their defense has just completely let them down. They've had one of the worst defenses in the Power 4 over the last 4 games. The last 3 games in particular, they've given up 131 points, I think it is, in the last 3 games alone. Now, if you want to make the argument that Pitt's a pretty good team, okay, they're ranked. I don't know how good they are. They're ranked. But NC State and Boston College scored in the 40s on Georgia Tech. I mean, these teams are just going up and down the field on this Georgia Tech defense. The offense has played well. Georgia Tech hasn't gotten blown out, even against Pitt, where they fell down 21-0 in the first quarter. They fought all the way back, and there was a point in the second half where that was just a 7-point game. Pitt ends up winning by 14. But you look at NC State and Boston College, these are 2 really bad teams, and particularly Boston College. Boston College is a 1-win team. 1 win. Georgia Tech beats them by 2. They gave up almost 40 points to Boston College. You look at Georgia over the last 3 games, they've scored 120 points in the last 3 games. Their offense has played better the last 3 weeks than it's played any 3-week stretch of the season all year. They appear to be clicking at the right time. They dominated Texas at home, went over a high school team this past weekend. They appear to be peaking here towards the end of the season, whereas Georgia Tech appears to have peaked weeks ago. It just seems like bad timing here for Georgia Tech. It's hard for me to imagine Georgia Tech winning this game. It's supposed to be a Georgia Tech home game. Georgia and Georgia Tech play a home-and-home series, you know. Georgia Tech sold the rights to their home game for this game. They sold it to Mercedes-Benz Stadium, the Falcon Stadium in Atlanta. So the tickets are split 50-50, which means it's probably going to be 70 or 75% Georgia fans. Georgia Tech sold their rights to play this game at home. I do think Haynes King is good. I think he'll get some yards. I think he'll make some plays. We saw that last year. Georgia's probably going to be without their best linebacker, C.J. Allen, which is magnified in a game like this where you got a quarterback like Haynes King who likes to run between the tackles. I think Georgia Tech will move the ball and score some points. How are they going to stop Georgia when in their last 3 games they haven't been able to stop Pitt, Boston College, or NC State? I just don't see it. I think Georgia probably gets into the 40s in this game, but at least into the mid to upper 30s. And I just don't think Georgia Tech's going to be able to keep up. I can't pick them in this game. Georgia's about a 2-touchdown favorite. I think about round 13 or so. Last time I looked, I got it pulled up over here. Let's see what the most recent number is. It's up to 14. So it's been 13, 14, 13 and a half in that range there. It feels like this is a game Georgia's going to win going away. 14 points. That's, it's obviously a tricky number there right at the 2 touchdowns. Georgia didn't cover at all in the beginning of the season. They've covered the majority of their games here in the second half of the season. But the betting angle aside, though, Georgia Tech has had a good year. They're 9-2, but unfortunately, those 2 losses in the last 3 weeks, they have played themselves out of contention for really anything that matters. It would take an absolute miracle for them to even get into the ACC championship game. They would need basically everybody ahead of them to lose here in this final week. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. Still a good year, even with a loss to Georgia. 9-3 would be their best year in a long, long time. They were 7-5 last year, so they're continuing to build year over year here under Brett Key. And no reason to think they can't keep it going next year. They're probably going to have to get a new quarterback. I think this is Haynes King's last year. I don't know. Maybe not. You get never-ending years of eligibility now in college football thanks to all these lawsuits. But anyway, I just think Georgia is still obviously way more talented just top to bottom on the roster than Georgia Tech is. I do think Georgia Tech has some advantages that they can exploit with the quarterback run game. Unfortunately, their defense has just been so bad. It's hard to imagine that Georgia Tech could win like a shootout game against Georgia. I know the score ended up being high scoring last year, but again, that's because it went to 8 overtimes. You take away all the points from overtime, and it wasn't necessarily a track meet type of game. It's Georgia Tech's defense really is why I just don't see how anybody could pick them to win this game. I'm going to take Georgia to win. 14 is probably too many points for a rivalry game, so I won't touch that, but I do think Georgia wins the game. So there you go. Put me down for Georgia and Ohio State. I don't know. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.